I've been very, very impressed with what I've seen over the last couple of days. I think, like Marinella, I've made a decision at this stage of my life to commit my energies, my philanthropic efforts to education. And thus, I've agreed to serve on both the boards of Teach for America and the KIPP Foundation. I'm truly honored to be here because this conference combines two of my great passions, education and the well-being of Mexico, the land of my ancestors. When I joined the TFA board, I asked to be assigned to the board committee overseeing Teach for All, our global arm, in part because of its effort to introduce the TFA model to Mexico through Enseña por Mexico. And in that regard, let me take a moment to recognize, please stand, Eric Ramirez. Eric has been heroically leading this effort in Mexico for the last couple of years. And I'd urge all of you to try to help Eric as he is attempting to build this program. Before I get to the substance of my presentation, let me just say a word about Wendy Kopp, because her story is a powerful reminder of the role that an individual with a great idea, an irrepressible passion, and optimism can have in creating transformational change. Let me see, how many of you are still in college right now? Let me see a show of hands. You've got a lot of college students out there. Well, you know, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but Wendy developed the idea of Teach for America for her Princeton senior thesis. Yes, as a college student. The idea was to create a national core of outstanding recent college graduates who commit 2 years to teach in urban and rural public schools. At the time, some people thought she was naive. They would ask, why would some of our nation's best and brightest graduates, kids graduating from the most elite colleges and universities in America, choose to work in some of the worst schools in the United States? Well, they did, and they do. Last year, 18%, get this, this is an unbelievable data point. Last year, 18% of Harvard seniors applied for TFA. These are young people who in the past would have chosen the path to Wall Street or some other lucrative career. TFA, quite simply, has made teaching cool. Today, there are over 9,000 TFA core members teaching in the poorest communities in the United States, and they are reaching more than 600,000 students. The TFA Alumni Network numbers over 24,000, and many alums now serve in significant leadership roles in education, business, politics, public policy, and social reform. And more importantly, these alums proudly carry their passion for education, reform into their new roles. Wendy started TFA with a very basic idea. She wanted to debunk the conventional belief 20 years ago that a low socioeconomic background basically guaranteed an educational achievement gap, that poverty determined educational outcomes. She wanted to prove that through the right kinds of interventions, with the right kinds of teachers, armed with the right skills and training, the trajectory of kids born into low-income circumstances could be changed. This presentation walks through the lessons we've learned in countries around the world about what it takes to achieve educational excellence and equity, and the role that the Teach for All programs can play in the process. Eric, I think you're controlling the slides, right? All around the world, Socioeconomic background predicts educational outcomes. This is true in my own country, in the U.S., where a fifth of our nation's children live below the poverty line. Only 8% of them will receive a college degree by the age of 24, compared with 80% of children born into families in the top quartile of family income. It is also painfully true in this country. This is a problem we're working to address. Let me add parenthetically that as an American of Mexican descent, I am especially alarmed with the conditions I've described because the fastest growing segment of our school-age population in the United States is Latino and economically challenged. And unless we make dramatic progress in closing the achievement gap, this community will be unable to reach its full economic potential. I read an article last week talking about litigation taking place, a lawsuit taking place in Austin, Texas, once again challenging the Texas system of school finance. And one of the demographers pointed out that by the year 2050, two-thirds, get this, two-thirds of the school children in Texas will be Latino, primarily of Mexican heritage. That is an amazing data point. Next slide, please. Over the last 5 years, Teach for All has been working to accelerate the impact of programs that are adapting the model of Teach for America in countries in every region of the world. One of the most surprising learnings of these 5 years is that the nature of the problem we're addressing is so similar from place to place. This becomes clear in walking around classrooms all over the world. The most marginalized children face so many extra challenges and attend schools that weren't designed to meet their extra needs, which means that their reality looks far more similar than different from country to country. In spending time at the school and governmental levels, we also see similar patterns in the prevailing ideology, policies, and practices. The good news in all this is that the solutions are shareable. What works to overcome educational inequity in one country can be adapted to other countries. For many of us, the problem of educational inequity seems so enormous and intractable. In fact, 20 years ago in the United States, the assumption was that we would have to solve poverty to solve educational disparities. We didn't know how to solve poverty, so we were somewhat at a standstill. But over the last 20 years of Teach for America and 5 years of Teach for All, we have seen evidence that we can solve the problem of educational inequity. We should still try to solve poverty and mitigate its effects, but we don't have to wait to do this to give children the tools they need to break the cycle of poverty. The first evidence of this came in the classrooms of extraordinary teachers. On the right is Ivy Martinez. When she started working with fourth graders in San Jose, California, they were performing at about the first or second grade level and were already disengaged from school. She resolved to put them on a path to college. She worked with the students and their parents to get them on a mission. She taught the same students as fifth graders. Not only were they performing at or ahead of the fifth grade level, but they were gaining the self-advocacy skills necessary to make it through college. Each week, they have leadership circles to give each other feedback on their leadership, and they've actually planned out what they'll do if they're ever in a class that isn't providing them the educational opportunity they need. In other words, they are being taught to agitate for excellence. In the center is Anam Paya, who teaches in an all-girls school in Pakistan. She teaches 10th graders. And while some of them will be able to go off to college, others will be required to get married and stay in their communities after their 10th grade year. Anam is on a mission to ensure that each of her girls gain the confidence and goal-setting ability necessary to lead lives of purpose. She's grown their academic skills dramatically while producing students who are going to the best-regarded colleges in Pakistan, as well as students who are on a personal mission to convince the families in their community to send their girls to school. Again, she is part of an effort to build a movement, which is what we're trying, of course, to do here in Mexico. On the left is Chris Fairbairn. He is engaging in a leadership development exercise with his students. He works with children living in a community that is in the bottom 1% income group in the UK. And he coaches his students to the highest levels of math achievement, putting them on track for college admission. Ivy, Anam, Chris, and other teachers like them show us what is possible. Of course, the question is whether it is sustainable for lots of teachers to go to the extent they go to, and not just for 2 years, but for whole lifetimes. And this is why it is encouraging to see a whole new school that makes it easier for talented, committed teachers. Not necessarily absolute superheroes like Ivy, Anam, and Chris to meet the extra needs of their kids and move them ahead. Next slide, please, Eric. On the left is a picture of a KIPP school in Atlanta. This school is one of 125 KIPP schools, schools in urban and rural communities across the United States that are truly transformational in the sense that they take students whose background would predict one set of outcomes and put them on a path to get to and through college. These KIPP schools have inspired many adaptations. By our best estimate, there are more than 300 transformational schools now in the U.S., up from about 15 years ago. King Solomon Academy, center picture, is adapting this model to the UK. Already, their 5th graders are outperforming 7th graders in nearby schools in their neighborhood. And the 321 schools in Mumbai on the right are adapting this school model to India with great success. Incidentally, the founders of the KIPP network, the principals of about 70% of the KIPP schools, a significant percentage of their teachers, and the leaders of the adaptations are TFA alumni. Max, the founder of King Solomon, and Gaurav, the founder of 321, are alumni of Teach First in the UK and of Teach for India. When you dive in and understand what transformational teachers in schools are doing differently, you realize there is nothing elusive or magical about it. Ivy got her kids on a different trajectory by applying all the basic strategies of leadership. She set a big vision. My kids are going to get college degrees. Got her kids and their families on a mission. She sat down with them and spoke openly with them about where they were going academically, where they could be, and how they could get there. She was exceedingly goal-oriented. You can feel the sense of urgency in her room, and relentless. For example, when she realized she needed more time with her kids, she got them to come early and stay late. Similarly, there is nothing magic about what happens in the transformational KIPP schools and their adaptations. Always there is a school leader who has embraced a different mission than most schools have to ensure that all of their kids gain the academic skills and character traits to get through to and through college. Like great leaders in other sectors, they focus on building strong teams, building a powerful culture that aligns everyone, kids, parents, teachers, on the same mission, and they manage aggressively and do whatever it takes, longer school day, extra supports, and enrichment for kids to meet their extra needs. So now we know that meaningful transformational change for the most disadvantaged children is possible. And the question is whether it's possible to scale this success. Can we reach the point where whole communities achieve transformational change? While we haven't seen this happen in the United States yet, we are encouraged to see communities that many had given up on 5 or 10 years ago making dramatic progress. In New York City, the nation's largest school system, 1.1 million children, 80,000 teachers, 1,700 schools. We've seen the graduation rate among African American and Latino children rise by 20 points in the last decade. Fourth graders are a full year ahead of where they were 7 years ago. And the college readiness rate among high school graduates has more than doubled. Of course, there's also still a long way to go, but this is meaningful progress in a system this big. In New Orleans, the percentage of children meeting state standards has more than doubled from 23% to 48% in the last 4 years. And the dropout rate has dropped in half. At Teach for America, we have begun to articulate what differentiates the communities that are making the most progress. We've seen that initially, it is important for communities to focus on two things. One, channeling as much talent and energy as possible into the highest need schools in the form of teachers and principals. And two, developing proof point schools like KIPP. This is important to fuel understanding of what is possible and what success requires while growing the capacity necessary for scaling success. Scaling up and sustaining success requires informed, committed leadership working at every level of the education system, in the political sphere, in the community, in philanthropy, even in unions. In looking closely at the history of New Orleans and New York City, it is clear that having significant leadership within education is vital, but that aligned political leadership is also crucial, as is community leadership to ensure that students, parents, and other community groups are making their voices heard in support of change. At the same time, we see the critical role of philanthropy. We see that unions can be more or less constructive depending on their leadership. And we see the vital need for fostering more pioneering leadership in the realm of social change because we need to address the root causes of educational inequity. Ultimately, we conclude that whatever we see, or that wherever we see the kind of meaningful change we need in classrooms like Ivy's or schools like KIPP or communities like New Orleans and New York City, we see transformational leadership. Leadership committed to bold change for kids with an understanding of how to achieve that change. Producing this transformational leadership is the mission of Teach for All programs. Here's how Teach for America and other Teach for All programs work. First, we recruit aggressively to identify the real leaders, people of all academic disciplines and ultimate career interests, to commit 2 years to teach in high-poverty communities. The reason we ask for 2 years is that we've seen this is important to be competitive with other corporate and service options. The leaders in this generation aren't initially willing to commit longer, but this changes. 2/3 of alumni at TFA and across the Teach for All network work full-time, long-term in education, while others move on to be advocates for change from other sectors, which, as we've seen from the previous slides, is vital. When they invest in their development with the aspiration that they become transformational teachers for the sake of their students and for the lessons they'll learn. This is a foundational experience for lifelong educational leadership and advocacy as these teachers gain unshakable conviction in the potential of their students to excel, and real insight into what it takes to set them up for success. These programs invest in accelerating the leadership of alumni so that they become a long-term force for change in their communities. This is a picture of TFA's 20th anniversary alumni summit, where 11,000 people came together to reflect on what had been accomplished and what more had to be done. What's encouraging in the U.S. right now is that there is real momentum for fundamental change in communities across the country, and the TFA alumni are at the center of it. In New Orleans, a quarter of the principals are TFA alumni. TFA alumni and core members are reaching half the kids as teachers. The state commissioner of education in Louisiana, whose leadership is vital to fueling and sustaining the progress, is a TFA alum, as are most of the district leaders and the leaders of virtually all of the nonprofit organizations and advocacy groups that had fueled the change, including New Schools for New Orleans, which has played a central role in engineering the progress. In New York City, 70 TFA alumni work in the Central District, and they run virtually every division: student assessment, early education, English as a second language, teacher quality, academic performance, etc. They are principals of 120 of the schools, including many of the highest performing and fastest improving, and also lead multiple advocacy organizations, including Educators for Excellence, which is educating teachers about the reforms and supporting them to make their voices heard in shaping policy. Ultimately, the vision is to have unstoppable movements within countries all around the world that are informing each other and moving more and more quickly in our pursuit of the day when all children have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. Stepping back, what we've essentially learned over the last 2 decades is that we can make a meaningful difference in addressing educational disparities, and that cultivating the leadership capacity for school systems and countries is key in this pursuit. Teach for All programs are one very promising avenue for doing just this, and we hope over time to build the support for Enseña por México. But we cannot do this without the support of the private sector, which is so influential in so many ways in both the United States and Mexico. The private sector has been vital to the success of TFA in the United States and will be equally important to the growth of Enseña por México. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conference.